Jane Elliott is an anti-racism activist, former third-grade school teacher, a feminist, and LGBT activist. She first became famous in the late 1960s after performing her Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes exercise on her third-grade class. She has since performed the exercise on many people around the world in an attempt to show them what racism is like for people of color on a daily basis. Jane Elliott is joining us today by phone. Jane, thank you so much for coming on today. But first, I want to play a clip because many people have accused you of being harsh or insensitive, and this is an example of why people make that claim.
You're doing it again. You're doing it again.
I don't care.
You're doing it again.
It's wrong.
You're doing it again.
Persecuted her for standing out.
You're doing it again.
Persecuted him for standing out. The only change that ever happens is when people stand out, and I have to stand back too.
Martin Luther King Jr. was shot. Are you in any physical danger here? Are you in any physical danger here? Is that girl in any physical danger here?
Jane, thank you so much again for coming. Are you being insensitive and harsh?
Oh, I always think that's rather delightful because it's an indication of their ignorance about what harsh really means.
Right.
Harsh means being afraid to send your son out of the house in the morning for fear he might not come back because of the ignorance of people who think there's something wrong with skin color. That's harsh. Harsh is a little boy walking across a park with something in his hand and gets shot by a policeman because the policeman is ignorant about skin color. Harsh is little children in the schools on a daily basis in this country who are subjected to psychological genocide because of the way teachers treat them. What I do is one day in the life of a child.
Now, last week I interviewed a black man who is an anti-racism activist, and I asked him about you. I quoted you as saying, "Things are better than they were when I was 13, but they're not as good as they were when I was 50. And I asked him about that quote, and he appreciates you, but he disagreed with that specific statement. He thinks that racism all along has slowly been getting better, but that we're noticing it more now because of social media and the internet, all those types of things. So he says it's getting better, but racism is just more seen through the internet and social media. But I would think that Trump, who we'll talk about in a moment, kind of heightened that racism or made people who were already racist feel more comfortable speaking out. So what are your thoughts on that?
If he isn't very, very careful and very watchful and very, very, very vigilant, he needs to realize that what we have going in the presidency of the United States right now is an attempt. It's an attempt at racial cleansing. I don't think he realizes that. I don't think he realizes that the reason we want to put a wall on the southern border of the United States is to keep those brown-skinned people out. He obviously hasn't been watching what's going on. And if you've made it as a person of color, you are more inclined to relax. Those who are still on their way up know they can't relax.
I know it's hard for you to do, Jane, but I want us to go back to April 4th, 1968, Memphis, Tennessee. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. Take me back to the moment you knew, what effect it had on you, and why it lit such a spark on you to where you are still here to this day at age 83, still fighting racism.
I can't remember that day without going a little crazy because he represented hope for all of humankind. The telephone was ringing when I walked into the house, and I answered the telephone. It was my sister Mary, and she said, "Is your television on?" I said, "No." She said, "Turn it on." I said, "Why?" She said, "Because they shot him." I said, "Who did we shoot this time?" It was a joke. And she said, "Martin Luther King Jr." And then the joke was all over. And I felt such a feeling of sorrow and anger and disappointment. And I was infuriated. I've never forgotten them. I'll never forget them. And I'll never forget how it felt that day. And the next morning, I had to go into my classroom and explain the killing of one of our heroes of the month to my third graders. There was no way to do it. John Dewey said we learn by doing. I decided that the next day my students would learn about walking in the shoes of a child of color in this country by doing it. Now, not seriously, not sincerely, not really, but at least for a moment. And they knew that it would end at the end of the day. Black children don't know that it's going to end at the end of the day, or that it's ever going to end. I don't like to talk about it. I don't like to think about it. I don't like to remember it.
Now, I want to counter that reaction with your reaction on November 4th, 2008, we elect the 44th and first black president of the United States. I want your reaction not based on what has happened since, but that night, in that moment, what were your thoughts?
Well, in the first place, I was totally aware, and so should everybody else be aware, that Barack Obama wasn't our first black president. Abraham Lincoln was our first black president.
Really?
Abraham Lincoln was part black, part white, and part Cherokee Indian, as I understand it. But we called Barack Obama our first black president because we are ignorant. We didn't know.
Really? I didn't know that. I guess they didn't teach us that in the schools.
Of course we weren't taught that in school. They didn't dare teach us that in school. You're making the mistake of thinking that schools are for educating children. They are not. They are for indoctrinating children and making them into good American citizens. And the only way you can be a good American citizen is to believe the lie of white superiority. Barack Obama became President of the United States. I was absolutely, totally joyful. Because, except that I was afraid he wouldn't live through the first night, to say nothing about 8 years. It didn't occur to me that they'd let him live that long. But I was so totally pleased and so proud and so happy about that. And so were all my kids and grandkids. We were dancing. We were so happy. And I watched young black males walk tall and proud and stride instead of looking frightened the next day. It changed the behavior. It changed people in positive ways. And I also watched white people, numerous white people, become more infuriated than ever because there is a black man in the White House.
Right. Now, I want to go back to something you said on the Oprah Winfrey Show back in the 90s. You made a comparison on that show that literally made my jaw drop. It's the moment I said, oh my gosh, who is this Jane Elliott lady? I need to check her out. And I became a fan ever since. You said, forget the melting pot theory. Think of the United States as a salad bowl. And when you made that comparison, it clicked. I woke up. So for our viewers, make that comparison of how we should think of the United States as a salad bowl. And
I don't use salad bowl anymore because instead I use stir fry.
Oh, really?
Stir fry is in a melting pot. You put all these different elements in, and then you heat it up and you boil them up together, and you melt them all down. They all come out looking the same. In a stir fry, you stir all these different elements together. You add some heat to them. You heat them up, but you don't melt them together. They don't combine. They are separate and beautiful in their own element. They preserve their identity. And that's what we ought to do in this country. We ought to appreciate people as they are. In a stir fry, you want each of the elements to maintain their size, if possible, their shape, if possible, their color, their flavor, their texture, certainly, because it makes for a more pleasing and appetizing whole. That's what this country ought to be about.
Because the idea of being colorblind is in and of itself racist.
Oh, for God's sake. When some woman, it's usually white women who say these things to me, because they say them to me because they think that I'm white, they're white, we're going to be all right. No, it doesn't work that way. White women will say to me, I'm colorblind, I don't see color. And I say, well, I could have guessed that. If you saw color, you wouldn't wear that shirt with those pants. And immediately they realize that what they have just said is ridiculous. They aren't colorblind. They see color. They want to pretend that there's no difference in skin color. There are different skin colors, 2,500 different skin colors on the face of the earth. I defy you to come up with 2,500 names for races.
Yeah, it's so stupid. Okay, so Jane, I have one last question, and I really don't want to offend you with this, so please don't take offense. It's not meant that way. But you're 83 now. Did you hope to live to see a time when racism didn't exist?
No, I'm not a fool. I had a hope that people would wake up and start to realize that skin color is not the problem. Ignorance is the problem. It isn't white privilege. It isn't white innocence. It is white ignorance.
Well, Jane, we're out of time, but listen, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. You're always wonderful, always lovely, always hell-bent, and always telling it like it is, and that's why we love you. And I'm such a huge fan, and thank you so much again for coming on. And I just wanted to say thank you for still speaking out and still standing up for what's right.
I don't want to. I'm tired of standing up, but I'm not going to knuckle under. But thank you for calling me. I appreciate it.
All right, Jane. Thank you so much, and I'm with you. I'm with you. Thank you. Jane Elliott, ladies and gentlemen. I encourage you to go check out some of her other material, some of her interviews, and even some of her stuff from the 90s on the Oprah show. And also, you can check out her documentary on her blue eye, brown eye experiment. And let me know in the comments, what do you think about Jane? Do y'all like her? So again, thank you so much for watching. I got through this interview with a cold, so hopefully my voice didn't annoy you too much. But subscribe and stay tuned for more interviews and more discussions about whatever's going on in the world, and just trying to make the world a better place. So thank you guys so much. Subscribe.